Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks, Big Paul here today. I have James Krieger with me. James is an expert on training and research when it comes to training. He's worked with Brad Schoenfeld and some other guys out there that are pretty smart when it comes to this stuff. I enjoy going down the rabbit hole when it comes to training, and this is something I'd like to share with some other people out there, get you a little more knowledgeable about training and what works, what doesn't work, and we'll dig into the science of this stuff. How's it going, James?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So what got you, what led you down the rabbit hole of digging deep and going into the deep end with the training?
I don't know. I think I've always been a little bit of a scientist at heart. I'm actually a former computer science guy myself. I grew up in the MS-DOS days, I taught myself. I remember in high school teaching myself assembly language programming on the old, Intel x86 processors. And we're talking like I remember writing programs in, C and base, even the old basic interpreter on MS-DOS, like all that stuff. But so I started off as a computer nerd, and then I kind of just lost my interest in it. And at about that same time, I had really gotten into weight training. I was a little bit fascinated by the changes that, because I was a really skinny guy. I basically went from skinny. I'm kind of athletic looking now. It's not like I'm some huge jacked guy or anything, but I was fascinated behind the changes that were happening in my body and kind of the science behind it. And I also found that whenever I would read the bodybuilding magazines out there, the sections of the magazines that would interest me the most would be where they talk about studies, like they talk about whatever, research was. And so that kind of led me down that pathway. And I ended up changing my major to exercise science, and it kind of just went from there. And then I, ended up, getting to know guys like Brad Schoenfeld. I actually had known Brad since, we're talking, I think I met Brad online probably late 90s. And, before he even had his PhD yet. I'm not sure he had his PhD yet at the time, but anyway, just becoming friends with those guys, and it just kind of took off from there. So.
Yeah, Brad's I'd say he's probably one of the smartest guys on the planet when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I'm the same way, man. I have a degree in computer science. I also have a degree in music, but I like puzzles. I like solving puzzles. Programming is like solving a puzzle, and peeling the layers of the onion back, and that's sort of what I like to do with training and hormones and nutrition and all that stuff, and figure out how to piece all those together and figure out what's the most optimal. And I compete in bodybuilding too. I've done pretty well in bodybuilding. I was just shy of having my pro card this year, but I don't know. I like, to me, it's like guys love to row upstream all the time. Like they do things in the most difficult way possible because they have feelings about stuff. They need to be hardcore about things, and it just blows me away. Like, you look at all the scientific data on training, and it seems like the way most people train is probably exactly wrong. It's always fascinating to me because powerlifters seem to have very organized, structured, well-researched training. They seem to understand how to train. A lot of the stuff goes back to Russia. I'm sure back in the 60s and 70s, I guess, maybe even further back than that. And these guys took all that research and brought it over here and applied all that. But bodybuilders train like idiots. I don't know what it is about bodybuilders, but they just train like morons. And we have a pretty vast amount of data now on what produces the most optimal hypertrophy when it comes to training. It seems like the data now is almost irrefutable. I think Brad published a meta study recently, wasn't it? I think I saw on volume and how volume affects training and yada, yada, yada.
I'm not sure. I did collaborate with him on a meta-analysis, but this was like This was probably 2017, I think, when we did it.
Yeah.
So we did a meta-analysis on volume, and the general gist of that meta-analysis was that if you looked across the body of research, on average, people tended to get the best hypertrophy with 10 plus, basically double-digit weekly sets. Now there's limitations with that data. It's like,
right.
It's based on averages. It's you're taking, whenever you do a meta-analysis, there's, it's only as good as the data that comes in. And there's weaknesses in the studies, that were, incorporated in the meta-analysis and stuff like that. But that was just kind of the general gist of it. My thinking has evolved on volume even ever since then. I tend to view volume now as a progressive overload tool.
Yes.
And just like anything else, you're always trying to do a little bit, some more reps or, more weight over time. Right. But, my attitude now is kind of using volume in the same way. You hit a rut, you hit a plateau. Okay. Well, you add a little bit of volume, see if that helps, if it does, then you stick at that volume. And then once you hit a rut again, you add some more volume until you reach a point where adding more volume just doesn't help anymore. And then,
right.
Then that's a time to maybe back off, so it's like, I kind of favor a cyclical approach to volume now, and the nice thing about that is it allows you to individualize your volume. So one of the limitations of looking at research studies, as great as they are, and they do tell us a lot, they can't always tell you what happens on an individual level. Like,
right.
I think on average, a good chunk of people are probably going to have pretty good results, in that double-digit weekly sets. But there's going to be some people who are going to need more volume than that. There's going to be some people who, for some reason, just do much better on low volume. And so I kind of favor a more kind of auto-regulatory approach to volume now, and just kind of using it as a progressive overload tool. That's how my thinking has evolved.
That's exactly the way I see it too. It is another variable to modulate as you trying to achieve progressive overload. I mean, there is only so far you can take progressing weights. I mean, I got to a point where I was incline pressing 405. I mean, how much more am I going to incline press, right?
Yeah.
And so plus, one of the things I like that Dr. Mike Israetel did is quantify some of these variables, stimulus to fatigue ratio, minimum effective volume, maximum recoverable volume, all of that. But one of the things that I never really considered before was the exercise, the expense of the exercise, the risk versus benefit, the fatigue cost of an exercise, and how that plays a role into things too. So, if I'm blasting out a heavy set of deadlifts, I mean, how much more am I going to be able to do?
Yeah.
But backing up to the volume thing. So that's exactly how I train. I progress volume over a block, and then I'll back off. I may advance weight, and then advance that weight at the beginning of the block, and then add more volume as I go. And with those variables that Mike had quantified, the stimulus, or I'm sorry, the minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume, I kind of know where I'm at now. I know, like, for me, like 8 sets per week, something like that is probably the minimum I need to do to maintain. And then the upper, and it varies from muscle group to muscle group too, I've noticed. So for me, like the top end for me, like, so for something like legs, if I get, or quads, if I get more specific, if I get over 20 sets, then I'm kind of getting into the territory where I can't recover. I start going backwards. So I progress my volume over a block somewhere in between those two numbers.
Yeah.
A question for you. Do you think that has to do, I know there's a lot of variables as far as people, individuals, as far as ability to recover from volume, but do you think muscle fiber type distribution has any effect on that, or has research shown any difference?
I am not aware of any research that's shown. I'm a little bit skeptical that muscle fiber type would play a role, just because the differences in muscle fiber type between people they're not like enormous, someone maybe, and this is really oversimplifying things anyway, because really muscle fiber types are kind of they're more on a, what I want to say, more on a kind of a continuum and not like this fast twitch, slow twitch, right?
Right.
But just to simplify things, someone might be 50-50 fast twitch, slow twitch, but someone else might be 60-40. But you're not talking like such a drastic difference. And I'm not anywhere of any research that suggests that one muscle fiber type recovers better than another. I don't know. I've always been kind of skeptical of that. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm just not really sold on the idea,
Yeah, that was always sort of a bro logic thing that I heard tossed out there, but I had never actually seen any research data on it. It was one of those things you hear guys talk about, but I wondered what the variability of muscle fiber type is from person to person. I was curious if you knew seen anything. I hadn't seen anything. I haven't. There's also. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I haven't seen anything, but I know. We know that even we know that even slow twitch fibers respond pretty well to resistance training. And they're recruited as well. So I'm skeptical of not only fiber type, but also trying to target specific fiber types. I just don't think, I just haven't seen any convincing data, one way or the other. So,
there are other variables that play into it too, nutrition.
Oh yeah.
That's another thing too. Like I saw recently, was talking to a guy, talked about how he had changed his training, and then he started making a bunch of progress, but then I peeled the layers of the onion pack and looked at his diet, and he wasn't eating protein before, animal protein before he added animal protein in, and it made a big difference in his results. Things like that people don't consider. Nutrition plays a huge role into it as well. So as far as, what do you, what's the primary driver? What does research tell us is the primary driver of hypertrophy?
Well, I think the primary driver is, if you want to get down to it, it's tension on the muscle fibers themselves. Right. So, that seems to be the driver of hypertrophy. That's why you see stretch overload cause hypertrophy, right? Some of the old classic studies, Jose Antonio, I think his grad work in the 90s when he was a grad student, he hung weights off bird wings, right?
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, he hung weights off bird wings and he caused hypertrophy, just the constant tension, right? But it's the same thing when you're doing resistance training, you're causing tension on those muscle fibers. And so that's the primary driver, is the tension on the fibers to stimulate that hypertrophy. Then everything else becomes secondary. How long is that fiber subject to tension? How often does it need to be subject to that tension for you to stimulate, protein synthesis in the fiber to a sufficient degree to where it actually grow in size, that type of thing. But it's the tension itself that's the primary stimulus.
Yeah, mechanical tension. And as you mentioned, the variables that we can stimulate that with, load is obvious, right? That would be one. And then volume, I would say would be another one. And then, one that people don't consider is exercise form. I see a lot of guys that they just get really good at cheating or leveraging weight up. They're not actually placing any stimulus on the targeted muscle. So, these are things that people don't think about. As far as the research on reps and reserve, this is one that kind of blew my head open over the last, half a decade. I'm older. I'm in my late 40s now. And I used to have this knucklehead thing in my head where I had to train everything to absolute failure and beyond. And it just got to a point when I got older, all that did was get me hurt. I was just getting injured all the time. And I read Mike's book, The Scientific Principles of Hypertrophy, and I started keeping a couple reps in the tank on everything, and I started growing again. That's in my late 40s. It was adding a little more volume, keeping a little more in the tank, and I didn't get hurt. It's interesting that a lot of the new studies. Maybe that was the one I was thinking about with Brad, where they were talking about reps in reserve. But it's interesting that with the reps in reserve about how you don't need to train to failure to elicit hypertrophy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is that, I mean, you're recruiting, most, if not all, your muscle fibers fairly early in a set, even with a moderate load. And so that's number one, why you don't need to train to failure. And then I think, you talk about that stimulus to fatigue ratio, trying to eke out that last rep or two to failure is causing a ton of fatigue, but it's not necessarily adding much, if anything, to your stimulus, right? So it's like, but yeah, there's tons of research that suggests, even 1 or 2 reps in reserve works just as well. In fact, there's a few studies suggesting it might even work a little better. It's kind of a toss up, but yeah, just leaving a rep or 2 in the tank, you're going to go grow just as fine. And you're not going to leave the gym just absolutely wiped out, or like I said, maybe getting hurt, like if you're losing form or whatever. The interesting thing is usually what I like to tell people is, stop when you get like a really noticeable slowdown in rep speed, right? Yep. Yeah. And I think that's a good, rather than trying to time your reps and, looking for a certain velocity loss threshold, which I don't think you need to do that. I think once you get a really noticeable slowdown in your rep speed, then I think that's probably a good place to stop, so, because that chances are you're only going to have a rep or 2 left once you hit that point anyway. So
yeah, and that's exactly how I've been doing it. I'll wait until like I am starting to struggle to get the weight up a little bit, and then I'll pull back there. I've also, it's the whole stimulus to fatigue thing. You're not absolutely trashing your CNS when you're doing that. You're not. I've noticed like not causing like severe damage, like joint and I think a lot of times like when guys get to those last few reps, they end up cheating or swinging or heaving the weights, and then you're doing joint and connective tissue damage as well. I think a lot of guys mistake that with overtraining. They think that they're overtrained when they're actually just form sucks and they're putting a lot of stress on joint and connective tissue and not actually the muscle. But what I've found is when I keep a rep or 2 in the tank, I can actually train everything twice a week and recover just fine. And I would imagine, I know there's an upper limit on it, but I would imagine that over time that accumulates more stimulus and probably adds more potential for hypertrophy. Maybe not. I don't know what the research shows on that, but it seems like I can get more frequency in and potentially have more opportunities to grow.
Well, yeah, I think, my stance on frequency is basically it's a tool to manipulate volume, right? So like,
right.
It's just a way to, let's say you're doing a classic or bro split or whatever. You just get this point of diminishing returns in the session where you keep trying to add more and more sets,
Right.
But if you're going to add another day in the week, instead, and get a little bit more weekly volume that way, you're actually probably going to do better off. You'll probably be better off. So, and in fact, there was a recent study. I think it was Mike Zordos covered this, or he talked about it, but I haven't read the paper myself. But basically, they looked at frequency, and they found that frequency didn't matter on a volume equated basis, which is an agreement with a meta-analysis that I've done with Brad before on training frequency. Frequency doesn't really matter on a volume equated basis. But if you're using frequency to add more volume to your week, then that's where it can be beneficial. And so yeah.
Yeah, that's what I found. Like you were saying, rather than doing 20 sets of workout, I can split those 20 sets across 2 workouts, 10 sets. If I know my maximum recoverable volume for legs is 20 sets, or quads, let's just say quads. I mean, that would be an impossibly long workout if I'm training everything together. Where I can split that up into 2 workouts over the course of the week and as you said, get a little more. That makes a lot of sense. Get more volume in that way. But the way I've been training probably for the last 4 or 5 years is I do a push-pull legs and I hit everything twice a week. I keep a couple reps in tank. Essentially, I follow what Mike's principles are, and I do a 5 or 6 week block where I'm pushing volume up. And I've been very judicious with my exercise choices, where I try to pick exercises that are not going to blow my CNS out as far as fatigue goes, and especially at my age, increased risk of injury. So for me, at this point, I don't see any point in doing deadlifts or squats at my age anymore. It's just not, the risk to benefit just doesn't seem to add up to me. That's another thing. I thought that was very interesting. That is, I'd never really considered the fatigue cost of certain exercises before. So if rather than torching myself on a single set of deadlifts for back, would I be better off saving that and doing multiple sets of say, some sort of machine row? Would I probably get more stimulus from that, right? I would assume.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, if I were to go back and do a lot of my training over again, there's so many things I would do differently, and I wouldn't I have just a lingering back issue now, and I'm at a point where there's very little I can do with my legs. Part of it, I don't know if it's a disc issue I have or whatever, but even things like leg press or whatever will cause me back issues now. And so I'm stuck doing leg extensions and stuff. But I used to squat, and I used to do a lot of front squats. And the back injury happened when I was going really heavy on front squats, and I lost my form, and it's if I were to go back, and do things over again, I wouldn't have been doing that. It's just it's not worth the, it's not worth the injury risk. And there's other things too. I used to love doing weighted dips. It was one of my strongest exercises, and I could really load up on it, and I would do heavy sets, but the problem is with dips is that it puts your shoulders in kind of a compromising, it's not the best position for your shoulders to be loaded up,
right.
And now I'm at, I just turned 50, and it's I can't do dips anymore. I haven't done them now for, I don't know, several years now, but again, it's just, it started to cause me shoulder issues, even though, I was still doing it even into my early 40s, it added up over time, and if I were to go back, I probably would have never done the dips, just knowing what I know now, so.
Yeah, it was the same thing with me, man. I actually tore my UCL in my elbow doing weighted dips, and then my shoulders are a mess now. My labrum, I'll be 50 next month, but my labrum, I have a torn labrum in my left shoulder.
Yeah.
From wear and tear. I mean, and you'll see it intuitively. Most big bodybuilders, professional bodybuilders, I'm around that crowd a lot. They stop doing stuff like that. They don't do that stuff anymore. I think they figure out that you can't keep training that way and sustain a career. So you don't really see, it's interesting because it used to be that everybody thought you had to squat, deadlift, bench press, and you don't see big pro bodybuilders doing that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. And the machines now are really good too. There's some.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
I mean, we have some of this. I'm lucky at my gym. We have all the new equipment, but some of these Atlantis and Panada and Prime machines are just really good. I don't know why you would need to take the risk of tearing something. I feel like a lot of barbell exercises just put you in a very vulnerable, fixed position where if you lose balance or get out of whack a little bit, like bench presses. I think I've seen more people get hurt while doing flat bench press.
Oh yeah.
I read a study. It was God damn it. What was it? It was a group of orthopedic surgeons. They said something like that. Basically, pec tears do not exist outside of bench presses. Really, like normal bench presses and football. I think those are the two places that people get pec tears playing football, which would make sense because of the way your hands are positioned for blocking if you got your hand clapped. But it was something ridiculous. It was over 80% of pec tear surgeries were caused by flat barbell bench presses.
Oh geez. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, that's actually one area where I was smart when I was young. When I first started training, I never did the barbell bench because it always felt uncomfortable on my shoulder to do it. And so I just never did it because, I didn't care what other guys were doing. It's I always did dumbbell stuff. of course, then I was done doing the weighted dips. But yeah, it's like, and now, yeah, for me, my pressing movements are a machine bench press, but like I keep the setting on it so that the handles are pretty low, so it's almost like a decline, right?
Yeah.
And also my hands are neutral. My palms are facing each other too, which is easier on your shoulder joint,
Yeah.
right? So, and then the same thing, I do incline dumbbell press, but it's the same thing. Like I don't flare my elbows out. I kind of have my elbows in.
Yep.
And I have my palms facing each other. You can't do as much weight doing that, but it's like it's way easier on my shoulders, So
you're also mechanically, I would think that you're placing more load on the pec anyway.
Oh yeah.
A regular barbell flat bench press, at least from what I've noticed, is just anecdotal observation. It seems like it mostly like if you look at power lifters, they all have their chests aren't that big. They have big front delts and big triceps. So it seems like it's mostly a tricep and front delt movement.
Yeah.
But they're also, they're essentially with the way they get their arch and everything, and how it's really a decline press. It's not even really a flat bench press, but the old elbows out, wide grip barbell bench press that bodybuilders used to do, it's just, I think, is chronically dangerous. It's the same thing with squats. Like I see with squats, it's another thing. Like people try to. For me, I want to protect my spine at all costs. You already talked about it. If you put your spine in a compromised position and you blow a disc out or have some sort of catastrophic injury, you're not going to be able to train optimally.
Well, and that's the thing. Not only that, but it affects all the other areas of your life. Like it's like, back issues. Like I got a bodybuilding friend who's, he's had back surgery and stuff, and and me, like actually just I don't know, towards the end of last winter, early spring, it's like, one thing I like doing is like, I like snowboarding and stuff. But I went in the gym and I did some single leg press thinking it wasn't going to bother my back. And it ended up really messing my back up. And then I couldn't snowboard. I couldn't like do the stuff I like doing, So now I'm just like, you know what? It's just not, especially me. It's like, I'm not even, I've competed in one physique show and I'm good with that. So it's like, especially if you're not competing, it's like, there's no reason, I can understand if you're a power lifter and you're competing in squats and deadlift, obviously you got to do that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a bodybuilder, you have other alternatives. And if you're not a competitive bodybuilder, if you're just trying to, look better or whatever, even then that's even more reason just to be safe, because there's no reason to mess yourself up,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I said at the beginning, I don't think bodybuilders, I'm a bodybuilder and I enjoy bodybuilding, but most of the people watching my channel are bodybuilders. It doesn't seem like bodybuilders put a lot of critical thought into how they train. They just don't. They just don't. Like just asking yourself, do you really need to squat? Something like that. I've seen so many guys, I don't want to name a name, but I know a guy that just got his pro card and was continuing to squat crazy amounts of weight, 700, 600, 700 pounds, and fractured his spine, cervical spine, had fell forward and had the bar roll up on his neck, and his career may be over, so, and then as a pro bodybuilder, if you get there, you get your pro card and you can't compete, then you're not going to make any money. I don't see what the point what the point of it is. It's like squats aren't even that great of for most people. I guess it depends on your unique physiology, but it aren't even that great of an exercise for leg development anyway.
Yeah, it totally depends on your body type too. Like I'm, and this is probably the mistake that I made when I was training, trying to do front squats. So I was never built for squatting. I have long legs, a short torso. So automatically my squat is already really back heavy because of the length of my legs. And so it's like, I was never even built for squatting. And on top of that, I've always had fairly inflexible hamstrings and hips. I mean, I remember even as a kid, like, doing the stupid president's fitness test, whatever, and you do the sit and reach, and like I could never, even as a kid, I couldn't touch my toes. I just like, so just having that inflexibility and stuff would just, as I was just asking for trouble, trying to squat when I'm not even really built for squatting. It's like, so.
I mean, these are the critical questions that I just like people don't ask themselves. I see guys trying to jam the square peg or jam the round peg into the square hole. I mean, it just some things don't work. And it's individual. Like I'll see guys, they love to look at an outlier and use an outlier as an example, like the Tom Platz squatted. I'm like, well, Tom Platz was 5'2". That dude was built for squatting. I mean,
he was totally built for squatting.
Yeah, I'm almost 6'2". Man, I'm the same situation as you. The squats for me are just a glorified good morning.
Yeah.
Right. It's all lower back for me. I'm not getting much. And not to mention that, I just think, is there really anything better about a barbell squat than doing, say, a hack squat where my spine is somewhat protected?
As far as your quads are concerned, it doesn't really,
right.
Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of bodybuilders forget. Our job, we're not power lifters. Our job is to stimulate hypertrophy. That's what we're in the gym for. The numbers, exercises don't matter. I want to be able to stay in the gym, stay relatively injury free, and train as frequent as I possibly can, and maximize hypertrophy without tearing myself up, and extend my career as long as I possibly can. And the guys that last as long, like into their 50s, like I have, generally are more mindful of that. I believe me, I've done damage to myself when I was younger, but you look at the bodybuilders, it's funny, like the guys that have long careers, the guys like Dex, I don't know how much you follow bodybuilding, but Dexter Jackson and Kamal Ergani and guys like that last into their 50s, they all train intelligently. They're not training like a power lifter.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all. What would you think would be? I mean, if you were to design the perfect program for hypertrophy, what would it look like?
I mean, obviously, it'd be individualized. I mean,
just some high level.
To me, though, in general, it would involve, a mixture of compound and isolation movements. I would choose exercises that are fairly low risk, as far as, low risk of injury, but still can provide good stimulus. I would say frequency. I think there's a lot of flexibility in terms of frequency. I'd try to structure it to fit someone's lifestyle or whatever, and preferences. Again, I would use volume as a progressive overload tool. Let me think here. I tend to favor long rests between sets. Exception might be for some isolation movements. I think you can get away with shorter rests, but definitely for the compound movements, I think you got to do long rests. It's just, even if you're training in like moderate rep ranges or whatever. Oh, and that's the other thing for rep ranges. I would just stick with moderate rep ranges for most exercises. There's just no reason to be doing, 5 RMs and stuff. I mean, you don't need to. And for some of the isolation movements, I mean, you can be doing sets of 15, 20 or more, and as long as you're pushing the near failure, I mean, the research shows you'll gain just as much muscle, so it's kind of funny. If I were to go back and speak to my younger self, that's kind of, that's how I would kind of structure my training, so.
Yeah, it sounds exactly how I do it. I used to be a low rep, 5 to 8 rep range guy when I was younger, and do less volume. I would train with more intensity. That's, obviously if you're lower rep range, heavier weights, you're going to need more time to recover. You can't push the volume as much. That's another thing you touched on, the rest. Guys get obsessed with blasting through their workouts fast. Guys ask me about rest time between sets, and it's always been my take to go when you're ready, when you're like, it never made sense to me. If you're not recovered and ready to do maximum effort on a set, why would you push another set?
Yeah. And I think that's especially the case with compound movements. And I think by taking short rests, you actually, and there's some research to show this, that you actually on a set equivalent basis, for example, if you take 1 minute rests versus 3 minute rests, you'll actually gain less size with 1 minute rest, if you do the same number of sets. Now you can make up for it by doing more sets, but then what's the point? Like, it's like, it's like, you do, 3 sets of lat pull downs with 3 minute rests, or 6 sets with 1 minute rests. It's like, you might as well just do the 3 sets with 3 minute rests or whatever. So it's like, I just think, and that kind of gets me to something I wrote in my research review just recently. I think people probably overthink their training a little bit too. Like, like I said, you don't even really need to time your rest. Yeah. Just rest until you feel ready to go again, and it's fine. Like, you don't need to time your rest. You don't need to time your reps. I know guys like to say, oh, I'm going to do this 4-0-2 tempo or whatever. Right. And like the research suggests that, hey, as long as your tempo is controlled, it doesn't really matter whether eccentric is 2 seconds or 4 seconds or 5 seconds. It's just like, just make sure that the weight is controlled and you'll be fine. You don't really need to overthink it. And even the same thing with set volume. Like I said, I like to use it as a progressive overload tool. I mean, there's this one guy who would constantly private message me, and he'd ask me questions like, is it better for me to do 3 sets 2 days a week or 2 sets 3 days a week? Right. It's just something like that. I'm like, dude, you're overthinking it. Like, just do, either way is going to work fine. Right. Like, so.
Yeah. Guys overthink shit sometimes.
Well, yeah, it's like I think people, they try to micromanage their bodies, like with you just don't have that precision with your body. Like, you just don't have that level of precision. It's just like, there's a lot of flexibility in the way in the way that you can design a training program, as long as you just meet basic principles. There's a lot of different ways you can design a training and get to the same result.
I do nutrition for a lot of people, but I get guys, it's the same thing with nutrition. I'll get guys, they're worried about the osmolarity of their intra workout shake, and they're not even following a structured diet. I'm like, it doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter, dude. Who cares? I've never thought about the osmolarity of my intra workout shake. I mean, I guess if you're at the highest level and you have everything buttoned up, or you're an Olympia competitor and everything is just dialed in, then you can focus. My take has always been, don't worry about the 5% when you don't have the 95% button.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Get the 95% buttoned up first, and then we can focus on the little stuff.
Yeah.
So most people don't do the 95%. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting with the rest times that you said that, because I'm always telling people, just go when you're ready. You don't need to time it. You don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
Rep ranges, I mean, that's sort of where I've settled into. I'm compound movements, I'm somewhere in the 10 to 12 rep range.
Yeah.
And my isolation movements, probably 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And then rest times, like I said, I don't time it. I would guess I'm probably in the 3 minute on compound movements. And then, obviously a cable curl is not, a single arm cable curl is not going to take as long to recover from as a heavy, a hard set of hack squats. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, it may be more like a minute or a minute and a half when I cable curl or something like that, but just when I'm ready, when I can give maximal effort.
Yeah.
That's sort of been my take. And then, I mean, I think it's, as you mentioned, it's just basic principles. I've noticed too, form. I don't know what your take is on form, but this is another thing I think where people that are training for hypertrophy get themselves twisted up. They get obsessed. And this is another thing, like with progressive overload. I do, obviously it works, but I think guys get obsessed with beating PRs a little too much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you beat a PR if you just got better at leveraging or cheating the weight up. It's really insignificant.
Yeah. Well, I would even, it's even hard to call that a PR because you literally just changed the way you did the exercise from the last time you did it. Like if you didn't cheat last time and now you cheat to get a rep this next time, okay, you got an extra rep and you did a PR or whatever, but that extra rep, you cheated to get it anyway. So it's like,
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'll see it all the time at the gym. I have 20-inch arms and then there'll be some kid roll up next. I'm curling the 35-pound dumbbells. And this kid roll up next to me, picks up the 50s with, 13-inch arms. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? You're not impressing me if that's what you're trying to do. It just blows me away. And that's another thing I think I try to get through people's heads when I'm working with them is power lifters. If you're a strength athlete, your job is to get the weight from point A to point B in the most efficient fashion possible, right? We're not worried about mechanical tension.
Yeah.
We actually probably want less load on the muscle. We want to get maximum leverage and perfect technique and form to move that weight is in the most efficient fashion possible. It's probably the exact opposite for hypertrophy.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
And that's go ahead. I was gonna say that's the thing I think a lot of guys don't think about, and that's why I don't get hung up on PRs. I used to track and write down everything I did. I mean, which can be helpful if your form is maximized for hypertrophy and you're consistent with your form, then it can be a tool to measure it. But I think it becomes almost irrelevant if your form sucks or if you're trying to maximize form for improving leverage and getting weights from point A to point B. You're not a power lifter if you're a bodybuilder or if you're trying to grow.
Yeah. I totally agree on that. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of tracking, weights and reps and stuff. And, and I do it myself, but, I'm pretty smart about my form and stuff. And I mean, but yeah, if you're starting to progress just because you're starting to cheat, then, I mean, it's just sort of thing where someone has to be honest with themselves. Like, are you really truly still maintaining your form, or are you, just cheating to get the extra, few reps out, So
believe me, I love tracking stuff. My spreadsheets have spreadsheets. I'm a computer scientist. I love data. I track all my food. I track everything, my training and volume. And I know where all this stuff is at now. Some of the young guys I work with, they just get too obsessed with beating PRs. And I'm like, it's relative, right?
Yeah.
If your form sucks, it doesn't really matter. All right. I think this is good, man. Is there anything you want to promote? Are you have any services you want to promote?
Yeah. I mean, if you check out my website at weightology.net, I've got a research review. We cover some of the latest research in exercise and nutrition. And it's not just me writing the content. Dr. Cody Hahn is one of the writers. Dr. Brandon Roberts is a writer. And we also got Astrid Naranjo as a writer. And yeah, we'll review some of the latest research. In fact, we just reviewed some people may have heard of it, the big protein study by Jorn Trammell.
Oh, yeah.
That was a really cool study. We just reviewed that in our research review just in the past issue. So yeah, it's just a monthly subscription. And if you subscribe, you get access to all the back content. I mean, stuff going back to, 2017. I mean, we've got content dating all the way back to then. So yeah, it's something people, if they want to check out, they can check out their research review. So, and
I'll put a link to that in the video description below, folks, if you want to, and I need to go subscribe. I'll do that as soon as we're done here.
Oh yeah.
I love nerding out on stuff like that. All right. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.